Garrett's terminal is the only place that we are visiting on this side of the Benton Street overpass. And there's a specific reason for that. But backing up, Garrett Freight Lines was a company that was built by Clarence Garrett, and it was established in the 1912s, in the 19 teens, excuse me, for the specific purpose of taking goods and that from the train station and then taking them to points that were not available by rail line as yet. The Utah Northern Railroad Company was going north and south, while Union Pacific Railroad was going east and west. But even so, there were areas that were not as well served and could only be served by horse and buggy at the time. And now the newfangled cars and trucks. The Garrett insignia that is still on Garrett Way in Pocatello is actually not the first terminal of Garrett Freight Lines. It's the second one. The first one is the one that we're looking at right now. Clarence Garrett, as I said, was the person to start the company. He is not a native Idahoan. He is from California, but he came to Idaho with the idea of using trucks to transport goods. This picture is the very first truck that Garrett's had. It's an REO. It's a one-cylinder truck, and it would make a trip to Salt Lake City in 44 hours, which ended up being 3 days. The tires were very, very thin. They would either go flat or wear out quickly. The amount of payload that it could take was not very much, and somehow Mr. Garrett had the foresight to see that this was the way that life was going to go. He would tell the story later in life that people would in their horses and buggies would go sailing past him as he was making a run and yelling things like "Get a horse!" But of course, he was correct, and trucks became the thing of the future, and horses became obsolete. And the REO became obsolete too. The Garrett Freight Line, though, this is a picture of the railroad yard, again in the 19 teens. I like this picture because it really shows the turntable of the railroad nicely. But then just out of frame was the Garrett terminal. And this is the one that we're looking at today. The Garrett sign is not so visible on where the trucks would pull in and out, but it is visible in the brick on the taller buildings because of fading over time. So take a peek for that. But what would happen is things would get loaded off of the truck. They would go into the terminal. They would get sorted into where this certain goods needed to go. They would get loaded on trucks, and then off they would go. Mr. Garrett was very specific about, if there is a better way to do it, find it. And so Garrett Freight Lines was at the forefront of innovation in the trucking industry over the course of the years that Garrett Freight Lines was in business. Some of the major inventions that they had a hand in were both efficiency and also safety. Efficiency was a triple trailer truck, and for this truck, they had many talks with Washington D.C., the Department of Transportation, because the concern was if we turn this truck on a freeway or it gets caught with wind, it's going to turn right over. So how to make a chassis secure enough so that it could be secure on a road and that the trailer that was pulling it had enough power to pull all three trailers up a hill. The second thing was using diesel power to get a truck on a longer haul of a route from Pocatello to California, as an example. Eventually, Garrett's became the largest trucking company in the Western United States, going as far east as Minnesota. The third innovation that they had a major hand in were refrigerated trailers. in order to take things from Lamb Weston, for example, the frozen and potatoes from Lamb Weston to points that needed fries and tater tots. This I after a while, this Garrett's became the third largest employer in Pocatello. It at its height, it employed over 1,000 people. It was sold to another company called A&R in 1980. Garrett's is also pretty near and dear to my heart personally because my grandpa was the president of the company during his working life. He started as a truck driver because he wasn't allowed. He wanted to be a doctor. He wanted to be a fighter pilot, actually, first of all, but his eyesight wouldn't allow that. He wanted to be a doctor, but it was in the middle of the Depression, and he went to go see his dad in California, and his dad gave him enough money for one night's lodging, and said, "You need to go away. I can't afford you. I don't want you." So he needed to do what he needed to do to survive, and he became a truck driver for Garrett Freight Lines, and then worked his way up to being a terminal manager in Pendleton, Oregon, and then eventually made his way to Pocatello, where he met my grandma and got married, and they had my mom and my two uncles. So Garrett Freight Lines' history is tantamount to my family being in Pocatello. Very proud of it and very proud of the company, even though it unfortunately no longer exists. So as you're looking at the terminal, imagine what it would have been like at the height of the boom of the railroad, and as trucks are going back and forth, taking all sorts of goods to places that didn't have rail service.